What is happening in our prisons? Northern Ireland's prison population has risen by almost 40%, we're told, in the past 3 years alone. And we appear to be heading to the highest number of prisoners here since the Troubles. Let me ask you this question. It's a very simple question. It may be difficult to answer, but it's a simple question to ask. Do you think we're sending too many people to prison? Do you think we're turning to incarceration, imprisonment too often because we lack the imagination, perhaps, the creativity to find other ways to engage people in their lives through rehabilitation? It's easier to send them to prison. It may be more expensive, in fact, but it's just easier. Or maybe the public likes it. It maybe makes politicians more popular to say, we're sending more people to prison. But is it a good thing to be sending quite so many people to prison? 03030 80 55 55. We'll take your text on 81771. We're joined by Professor Phil Scraton, author and criminologist at Queen's, who has been researching and writing about our prison system for decades. Jacqui Durkin's also here, Chief Inspector of Criminal Justice in Northern Ireland. Welcome to both of you. Jacqui, I've been looking at some of the reports that have been done in our prisons over the past few years. Different prisons, different reports. Can you give us a sense of the situation in our prisons as you see it at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, William. What we find in recent prison reports are, as you've said, too high a population on people who are serving long periods on remand, and their access to whether that's substance abuse programs to help them come off either drugs and alcohol, or access to education and skills, and access to mental health support and provision are some of the key issues that we found in the prisons. But as you said, people spending a long time on remand with a backlog of cases in our Crown and Magistrates courts, and making sure that when they are dealt with, that sometimes it's very difficult for victims and witnesses whenever someone is released from court, time served because they've spent a long period on remand. And
let's just remind people what remand means. It means you haven't had a trial yet.
That's right.
You've been incarcerated, but no one's found you guilty of anything yet.
You've been charged with an offence, and you've been before the court, and a judge has decided based on evidence from police and prosecution, or maybe information from your defence solicitor, that a remand in custody or sending you to prison until your case is heard before the court is the right course of action and the right place for you to be. Of course, people apply for High Court bail, so if the circumstances change or the risks change, they can apply for High Court bail and be released from custody pending their trial.
Why does it matter to us, the public? Why does it matter to us that we have a prison system which is healthy, which is protective and safe, which gives purposeful work and occupies the minds and develops the minds of those who are incarcerated? Because you'll, of course, will get some people who will always say, I don't care what the life of a prisoner is. I just want them out of society. Why does it matter to us in your judgment?
Well, I think it needs to matter to all of us, because the vast majority of people who are in prison will be returning to our communities. So they'll be returning to live near us. Their children or their grandchildren will be going to school with our children and grandchildren, and they'll be needing access to those health services and other services that are in the community. But essentially, the Prison Service and the South Eastern Health and Social Care Trust and Belfast MEP that provide education and skills programmes in prisons, what they want is to make sure that those prisoners don't come back in through the door again, that we as a society are safer, that people have a consequence to their offending behaviour, and of course there is a punitive element that the community expects to see, that there's a consequence for breaking the law. And for victims and witnesses, it's really important to them that there has been a conclusion to that case. And often what you find is they don't want any more future victims and witnesses. So It's really important to a democratic society to say, yes, you've committed an offence, it's been decided by a judge or judge and jury that you've been convicted, that you go to prison, but it's really important that you get access to services and to programs and to health treatment while you're in there to make sure that you leave there a better person than when you went in.
That may mean education, it can mean work, it can mean other kinds of purposeful activity so that we can assist you along a journey of rehabilitation in society. Are we sending too many people to prison, Phil?
Oh, without question. I think that one of my most profound concerns is to see what that increase in prison population has been from April 2021 to the present day. That's a 40% increase. And that most of that will be situated on one prison at Maghaberry. What this has led to is the 2 houses that were condemned and decided not to be used again have now had to be reopened. So we are putting people not only into prison, but into conditions that previously have been considered inappropriate. 47% of those coming in are on remand. That means that, as you say, they're innocent until they're proven guilty. It's the highest proportion for a decade, and it is one of the highest rates in Europe. So this is a very difficult situation that we're now facing. 30% of the prison population have mental ill health. 51% are recorded as having an addiction, and that addiction is often fueled while they're in prison.
Or developed.
And developed if people come new to their addiction in prison.
Yeah.
I just want to pause on that for a second because it's a really important observation that when you're in a situation where you're locked down for more hours than you're unlocked, when there is no creative education, there's no creative work, in that situation, an addiction becomes an attractive proposition. 53% have a history of suicide attempts of self-harm. Now, if you're looking at these figures, mental ill health, addiction, suicide attempts, self-harm, this is not the place. A punitive environment is not the place. And a deprived environment, a lockdown environment is not the place. And the Justice Minister herself has stated that these are people, as she says, with incredibly complex needs concentrated within our prison population. And what she feels is essential is that this shouldn't be left to the Justice Ministry. This should be extended to health and communities ministers. In other words, there has to be an integrated collective response
a holistic
to
approach,
the issue. Exactly. What does that feel like? I mean, poor facilities, condemned blocks reopened, lack of meaningful work or education. I mean, whichever way you cut that, one of the greatest priorities of any penal system is work and education. That is what rehabilitation means. As I've already said, access to drugs and long periods of lockdown. And we have to remember, it is less than 10 years since the Chief Inspector of Prisons condemned Maghaberry as being in crisis, unstable, unsafe. He said at the time, one of the worst prisons I've seen and most dangerous. Now, I accept that there were some marginal improvements after that.
Only marginal?
Yes, I believe they were only marginal. And that, I would hesitate to say that other than now what we are seeing from the latest reports and the latest unannounced inspection in 2023, there is a repeat of those previous concerns. Jacqui will obviously talk to this. Decline in the healthy prison test, increased drug problems, decline in access to education, training and work. So in other words, it was maybe one step forward and half a step back, or is it a full step back?
Can I just ask Jacqui, do you agree with that assessment?
I think it's a little unfair. I think there has been some good work taken forward. I think it's on balance to say, I think it's important that everyone understands that the prison service have done some really good work, but they're also coping with large numbers. And Phil is right. What we were really disappointed about in our last full unannounced inspection in Maghaberry was a decline, particularly in purposeful activity and rehabilitation and release planning. So we're focused, as an inspectorate, we're focused on improvement. When we go into prison, we inspect in partnership with other inspectorates who look at health and education, and looked at safety and look at respect. But there's no doubt about it, the prison service are coping with a population that is increasingly demanding, whether that's through substance abuse, whether it's through mental health, whether it's through neurodiversity, and all the challenges that they have to cope with, including an older population and very limited access to social care for that older population. I think it's important to say as well, what concerns me particularly is the increase in the female prisoners, which are now over 90, sitting at over 90. So when we talk about people spending long periods in remand, those are people who often have families and children whose contact with their father or mother is disrupted. Children can go into care. It can have a lifelong impact on children when that family is fragmented. So I think there are a number of challenges that the prison service are facing and the South Eastern Trust are facing. But there's no doubt about it, there is massive scope for improvement, and we have pointed to that in our most recent independent review of progress, which followed the unannounced inspection. And I believe the leadership in Maghaberry Prison and in the prison service overall will take those seriously and try to make improvements. But that's difficult to do when you have a high population and you need to keep people safe.
Right. And you would agree, would you, that if we had a lower population of prisoners, we would be more able to do the kind of things that we need to do so that we're engaging with people in their lives rather than simply warehousing them?
Absolutely. I mean, my last report shows that invariably the prisoner development unit was the place where resources were taken from to make sure that the landings were safe, to make sure that prison officers were safe and that prisoners were safe. So when you eradicate those sorts of resources, of course it has an impact in making sure that people can get to skills or education or training. Right.
So now that's been very helpful from both of you. And I'm being told we've got the Justice Minister herself, Naomi Long, who's been listening with us for a few minutes on the line. Minister, Naomi, welcome. Thank you very much for talking to us for a few minutes on this. It's a really important subject, obviously. And I've been asking our audience if we are sending too many people to prison. That's not a civil servant's question. That's not a judge's question. It's a political question, isn't it, in a way, about the kind of society we want to have and the kind of prisons we want to have.
Well, actually, I think it is, William, a rational question that we should address the evidence around. So, for example, when it comes to what prisons are for, they are there to try to rehabilitate people, to ensure that they don't reoffend when they come out of prison. And we know, for example, that they are not effective places to put people for very short sentences. The rates of reoffending for people who are in prison for 3 months or less are much, much higher than those, for example, who are in for 3 years or longer. If you look at the reoffending rates for people who are community sentences, so for example probation orders, suspended sentences, cautions or informal warnings, those are much, much lower. Now some of that will be due to the kind of offending behaviour that we're dealing with, which may be much more ingrained by the time someone ends up in prison with a custodial sentence. Some of it will be because of the increased stability perhaps around people who are serving their sentence in the community, which is why that option is there. But it does, I think, indicate that the idea that simply locking people up in prison will lead to a reduction in reoffending and will change people's lives is flawed. It can change people's lives, but to do that, we need to have them in prison. We need to have them sentenced while they're serving their prison sentence. And we need to be able then to engage in that challenge and work with them to be able to alter behaviours and hopefully then rehabilitate them as they move through the prison system and prepare to reintegrate into society at the end of that process.
When it comes to the state of our prisons and how we use various metrics like the healthy prison metric and all the rest of it to try to test whether we've got good facilities that are safe and healthy. We engage people in terms of purposeful activity. We offer people education. We get them involved in those things. We don't keep them locked up for most of the day, but we rather get them into whether it's sport or other kinds of work or education, whatever it is, so that we try to work with people. Do you think, give us your assessment, your honest assessment of where we are right now on that journey.
Well, Well, look, I think things are much better than they were 10 years ago. I mean, I think Phil perhaps underestimates the absolute change that there was in Maghaberry over the last 10 years, and I think that has been recognised in Jacqui's report when she has gone in. But undoubtedly, since COVID, particularly re-establishing some of the education piece within prisons has been challenging. We are also looking, though, at some creative things that we can do. I was speaking to the Belfast Chamber last week, to business in the community, and to our development unit staff about some creative things we can do with potential employers to say, how do we get those people into the prisons, first of all, to inspire those within prisons about employment afterwards, to encourage them to believe that they can find gainful employment when they leave prison, but also then to get them onto a path, whether that is vocational training, whether that is through the education service, or whatever is available to them, so that we are giving people productive ways to be able to come out of prison and be able to reintegrate. We're increasingly pulling services which are beyond the gate services into the prison. So, for example, things like housing we know are critical in terms of people being able to access healthcare on the outside. So by getting the opportunity for housing officers to come in and engage with prisoners before release is important. So there are lots of really creative things that are happening, but undoubtedly as numbers go up, William, the priority is, as you said rightly, safety. And that has to be at the top of our list. And that does mean that the time we have available, the staff we have available to be able to do all of the other positive engagement is more restricted. And that does make things more challenging. But I think in terms of maintaining a solid regime and the best services possible with the resources we have is something that we remain absolutely committed to doing.
Well, look at this report from Jacqui's office on Maghaberry, the most recent one. Prisoners did not have regular and consistent access to high-quality education, skills and work activities to meet their rehabilitation. There was no effective or coordinated plan to reduce the demand for and supply of drugs, no means of assessing the effectiveness of actions taken. Not all serious safeguarding incidents had been managed in accordance with policy. Not all prisoners were provided with effective support to guide them through their sentence. Time out of cell for prisoners in Ban House was an average of just 90 minutes a day out of your prison. Access to psychologically informed treatments insufficient to meet the needs of the prison population. Oversight and management of prisoners on supporting prisoners at risk plans were weak. Gaps in the curriculum offered to prisoners, such as information and communication technology, etc., in the education plan. Lack of clear commissioning arrangements around addressing social care needs of the prison populations. This could not be described as a success story, could it?
Well, certainly not if you only read through those negative findings, but if you read the report as a whole, there is much positive within the report.
I'm reading out the 12 key concerns from the report.
Yes, and if you read out the 12 key concerns, of course they are of concern, but there are also positive things within Jacqui's report, and I think it's important when we read these reports that we read them as a whole.
It's not as bad as it was. No
one is saying that prisons are what we would wish them to be, and the significant increase in the prison population, for example, and particularly the proportion of people that are on remand is of genuine concern for us. But in the prison system, we are a demand-led service. We have to accept the people who are remanded in custody. We have to accept the people who are committed to our care, whether or not we have the capacity to do that. There is no option for us to go back and say there is nowhere to go, we need more resource. It just doesn't exist. So we have to manage within resource, and that's what we're doing. On the positive side, in terms of rehabilitation, we are seeing that there are some positive impacts on that, but there are issues that you've raised quite rightly, which do not lie with my department. So, for example, the provision of social care is a growing issue with the older population cohort of prisoners who will probably be in prison for the rest of their lives, but have none of the access to social care. And that's not something that prison officers can provide. That is something that only the health service can provide. The same is true when it comes to mental health and addiction services. Those are matters for the health service. In terms of, for example, when the report was actually published, by the time it had been published, we had already responded to many of those issues within the prison system. So, for example, when it speaks about the availability of drugs within the prison system, the majority of drugs now within the prison system are prescription medications that are prescribed to individuals within the prison system and are then traded on a black market system. Because thanks to the availability now of X-ray screening, we've been able to drive down the amount of illicit substances coming into the prison. And that has reduced that. But what it has meant is there is a premium in terms of people's legitimate prescription medication. And that's something that we, again, have to manage, but we can't do alone because obviously we're not the prescribers nor the controllers of the medication. So it is a challenging issue, William, but I do think that there are opportunities for us because we always come on as ministers and say, well, more money would sort the problem. And of course, more money would be welcome.
Well, I think what we're hearing you saying is fewer prisoners would help.
Well, I actually think that there are two parts to this. I think, first of all, I think fewer prisoners would help. I think if we were able to invest, and it would require investment in some of our alternative disposals, that would allow people to serve their sentence, to pay their dues to society, to, I hope, provide the reassurance to victims that their needs are considered, but also to do the rehabilitation piece and be less likely to reoffend. Further than that, I do think, though, we need a collaborative approach between departments about how we ensure that the people who leave prison, the majority of people will have reoffended within 6 months. So what we need to do is ensure they're properly supported during that period so they don't come back.
Thank you, Naomi. Naomi Longard, Justice Minister. Joanne Bunting also with us, the UPM MLA and Chair of the Justice Committee. Sorry, Joanne. Hi, Joanne. How are you doing?
Hey, William.
I mean, I'm looking through this report. I mean, Naomi Long just said there, safety's the number one thing. I'm quoting from the report. At the last inspection of Maghaberry in 2018, we found the outcomes for prisoners were not sufficiently good against the healthy prison test. At this inspection, we found the outcomes for prisoners remained not sufficiently good. And on rehabilitation and release planning, there's been a reduction from what was good in 2018 to not sufficiently good now in 2022. This is Maghaberry alone. Our prisons are not in a good state, are they?
No, there's no question about that. But first of all, William, I'd like to pay tribute to our prison officers who are doing their best under very difficult circumstances. Bear in mind that the prison officer population, the full-time equivalent, is for an operating level whenever prisoner levels were at 1,450. Now that level is at 1,891. So, I mean, there's not enough prison officers to do all the things that need to be done in prison. So inevitably, there are consequences for that.
Are we sending too many people to prison for non-violent crimes, for example?
Well, I don't think that there's any appetite within society for lighter sentences or going soft on crime. But the issue is, I think one welcome piece of work that's come out of this is that the previous Permanent Secretary set up a remand working group to look at the issues, to work towards collaborative working and to try and establish what information could be shared and to try and deal with the remand population and actually offer alternatives to remand for the judiciary.
Let me just bring Phil in on this, because I think some people listening to this will be hearing politicians talking about the story so far, and it's as if we say, pay the prison officers more, get more prison officers, maybe even build more prisons. As if we keep doing the same thing, we'll get a different outcome.
Yes, and I mean, picking up on a point that Joanne made, is that this sort of principle or idea that's out there in society, that by looking for creative alternatives to prison, that you're going soft on crime, when in actual fact, if we look at the international evidence on this, and we look at the evidence across the water and work that I've done myself personally, we can see that quite often community disposals, if they are attached to appropriate resourcing, appropriate professional facilities, are anything but going soft on crime. They're actually tough because they actually get people to meet the concerns that we have about their behaviour.
And if the test is rehabilitation,
and that's where rehabilitation lies. I mean, we have to decouple the issue of conditions in prisons, which I've already stated clearly are not appropriate, and alternative disposals within the community that are creative and fully funded.
Alternative being not incarceration, but other ways of intervening in people's lives so that we pull them away from crime, make them healthier citizens within society again. I wish we had more time. We're out of time. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. Let's get the news now. It's 1:00.